It's episode 72 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com, and while you're there, please click on the iTunes link, subscribe to the show so that you get notification on your phone or your iPod each week when a new show comes out. It helps the show if you subscribe, and also if you wouldn't mind leaving a comment and rating the show at iTunes. You could also subscribe at YouTube. All of the archives of the show are on YouTube. So you can, while you're sitting at your desk, pop up the playlist, listen to them from beginning to end. Also, there's an Amazon link in the right-hand sidebar, and if you click on that link and then do your normal Amazon shopping for the holidays, the Author Stories podcast gets a small commission from that, which helps us to keep increasing the quality of the show and getting new guests each week. I hope you enjoy it. Now on to my guest, Joanna Penn. Thanks for listening. Well, thank you for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast. I am your host, Hank Garner, and each week I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm very excited this week to have Joanna Penn on the show with me. Joanna has a very interesting writing career. She writes both fiction and nonfiction. She is a huge help in the indie writer community. Has written several nonfiction books that I have gotten great benefit from, and I know other people have as well. She has a very popular blog, but I would like to introduce Joanna Penn to the show. Welcome, Joanna.
Thanks for having me, Hank.
You're very welcome. Joanna, I start every show with a variation of the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer?
Well, I think I don't remember ever thinking I want to be a writer. I guess I've always written. So
that's a great answer.
I was one of the sort of earliest pictures of me with a pencil and a notebook, and I was always into stationery as a child, and I did back in the day before the internet, because we're that old. I used to write a lot of letters, and I have I still have a lot of journals. I've been journaling since I was a teenager, and so in terms of being a writer, I think I only really considered. And if we're saying a writer, I guess a writer is someone who writes. But in terms of being an author, like I will publish a book,
yes,
that really was a lot later. As in, it was only once sort of Amazon came along, once self-publishing became viable. I could see that as a businesswoman and as a creative, that this could be a possible career. So I guess before that, I didn't really consider it, but I've always written and always loved to write. It's just now I turn those ideas into stories, and I write thrillers as J.F. Penn, and then I write my nonfiction under Joanna Penn. So it kind of satisfies just both sides of my personality. So I think it's always been my perfect career, but really up until recently, it's been the domain of only a very few people, and now it's sort of more egalitarian.
You're absolutely right, and I think there's a whole swath of authors that are getting to live their dream now, because the world has changed in a way that has allowed us a platform and a place to share these ideas. You said that when self-publishing came along, that you really got the idea that you could tell stories and publish these. What was it that really caught your attention, and how did that translate into that first book?
Well, I started writing books when I was in Australia. So I'm living in England now, but I was in Australia, and I wanted to leave my job. I used to be an IT consultant, and I was working in an accounts payable department, which is, fascinating.
Stuff.
Yeah, for a mining company. And I really wanted to change my life. Like, I was just miserable. I was in my around sort of early 30s, just like, why am I doing this job? It's, it pays well, but it's just not me. And my creative side is very stilted. So I used to go to a lot of seminars, listen to a lot of audios, before podcasting was trendy, when we all used to download audios and buy tapes and things. I listened to a lot of self-help stuff. So I decided that I would write a self-help book. And the time was sort of, the people who were in the speaking circuit were all self-publishing, still do. I mean, self-publishing is not new. Ebooks are more new, but self-publishing in print has been around for a long, long time. So I started to do some speaking on career change and self-help. And the first book I wrote was a book on career change, and it is actually called Career Change. And it's still, I rewrote it after I did change my life. But the first iteration back in the day, back in 2007, 2008, I was basically intending to be more like a speaker, nonfiction writer, like a British Tony Robbins in a way, a sort of self-help author. But once I wrote that first book changed my life in a lot of ways. One of which was I learned how to publish and how to understood how to market. But I also started my site, thecreativepenn.com, pen with a double N, and started networking with a writer community. And I think that's one of the most important things when you want to understand how you can change your life. You have to see other people doing it. And through blogging and through starting my own podcast, I met a whole load of people who had done this, sort of blazed the trail and done that career. And so I decided to follow that path. And the fiction came about because I did NaNoWriMo one year, which is National Novel Writing Month. And we are recording this in November, and November is National Novel Writing Month.
That's right.
Yeah, so I wrote my first 20,000 words of a thriller, Stone of Fire, and then it took me about 15 months to get that to publication. And since then, I haven't looked back. I've written 10 novels and 5 nonfiction, and lots more to come.
Awesome. And we're going to get into Stone of Fire in just a minute, but that first book that you wrote, Career Change, had you actually changed your career when you wrote that book? Or were you kind of documenting your process and your hopes for that?
Yeah, so basically I tend to write nonfiction when I need to learn something myself. I wrote Business for Authors, How to Be an Author Entrepreneur, as I was going through the process of, trying to turn my own author business into a 6-figure business. And I wrote Career Change at the point where I was trying to change my own career. And I often find, as a writer, I only think by writing. If I want to know what I think, I actually have to sit down and journal it or write it, because then I can work out what I think. So that first book on career change I wrote because I wanted to understand the process of how do you change career, and what are the things you need to do. And at the time, the first title was called How to Enjoy Your Job or Find a New One. And then I rewrote it and called it Career Change later on. I rewrote it after I'd left my day job to become a full-time author entrepreneur. So it sort of documents that process and the mindset shift around being paid a paycheck versus being a freelance or entrepreneur when the money is quite different. And so I think I do write nonfiction to figure out what I think.
I agree with that, and I have taught school and also different workshops and seminars and things like that throughout the year for all sorts of different things, and the best way to learn something is to teach it. That's absolutely right, and I hope that strikes a chord with someone listening out there that there are lots of nonfiction books that need to be written, and the best way to learn it is to start writing that book.
Yeah, and I think the important thing with nonfiction now is that it has to have your own voice in it and your personality and your stories. So even if people have written the book, like if you want to write a book on career change, go ahead. There are lots of them, but there, one with your spin on it is the important thing. So, I have a book on book marketing, how to market a book. Lots of books on book marketing, but I really only came to understand how marketing worked once I sort of did a deep dive, and wrote that book. So again, it's just in fact I do the same with my fiction. It's exactly the same. So this book I've got coming out in a couple of weeks, Risen Gods, is about New Zealand and Maori mythology and earthquakes and tidal waves and demons, and I did so much research. And I lived in New Zealand, but I spent a lot of time doing research on the mythology and the looking at volcanology and all kinds of interesting things. And I do that on all my books. Like, one of the purposes for me in writing a book is research. It's probably what I enjoy. Well, one of the things I enjoy most about the process is the research. So I think that's, a lot of people enjoy that.
I totally agree. So your first fiction book, Stone of Fire, so that began as a nano book, and this episode is going to air the last day of November. So we congratulate all of you that attempted NaNoWriMo and finished this month. And there have been many books that have been on the show that started as NaNoWriMo books. In that month of November, did you finish the book then, or how did that process work for you?
No, not at all. And I think that Nano has, it's good to aim to win in inverted commas, but I wrote 20,000 words that month, and probably only about 2,000 of them ended up in the final book. but what's important is that it started the process, and it kind of, you have to force yourself to, write, and timed writing and deadlines is very important for actually getting stuff started. So I did get the idea for the series. So it's the first book of 7 at the moment. I'm just about to start writing book 8, the Arcane thriller series. So it's a secret British agency under Trafalgar Square that investigates supernatural mysteries around the world. So it's kind of Dan Brown meets Lara Croft, lots of action adventure fun, sort of religious mysteries and things like that. Conspiracy thriller, really. And I knew, so that in that Nano, I got the idea that I wanted to write a thriller series, because that's what I like to read. So I think writing what you like to read is super important. I love thrillers. I read lots of conspiracy thrillers, lots of religious thrillers, that type of thing. I have a master's degree in theology, so I get to use my studies.
I was going to ask you, I thought I'd heard you on another interview one time say that you had you had pursued a degree in theology. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I tend to use that quite a lot. I'm not actually a Christian, but I'm very respectful of all religions and find it. And so my books, a lot of my fans for my fiction are Christian or Jewish or, other religions. My next book will be about, about India, for example. So, but anyway, going back to the writing. So I did about 20,000 words in that Nano. And then what happened was I pretty much understood that I could write a book if I carried on the process of writing. And so I actually enrolled. So that was in the November. In the January, I started one of these sort of year of the novel things at a local college, which again gave me another deadline. And I pretty much spent that whole year writing the book and also learning all the things you need to learn when you write a novel. And there's so many things that you just don't know if you've only written journals or nonfiction things. So dialogue, for example, dialogue is something that you don't write unless you're writing plays or TV things, you don't write dialogue. So that was a big thing, looking at character, point of view, setting, there's so many things that you have to do. And so I spent that year learning about all the fiction type of techniques, trying to change the way I thought about writing, and also attending this thing, which was once a month on a Sunday, kind of go in and it was mainly to keep me accountable for a whole year. And I would really advise people to set these dates and goals and use deadlines to help. And what was interesting is that I think there were 20 of us on that course. And the teacher said on that first day, probably only one of you will finish your book. And I was like, that's going to be me. And sure enough, it was. And I've had emails from people who did that course with me saying I'm still working on that book, sort of 7 years later. No, was it 7 years? What are we now? 6 years later. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm on book, whatever, 15, 16 or something. So I think, again, if you set the deadlines and you do the work, then it does actually get done. It's like, yeah, if you write 1,000 words a day, or you write 500 words a day, or whatever, it does actually add up. And of course you have to go through the editing process, and there's a lot of stuff after you've done the first draft. But once you have a first draft, you have something to work with, basically.
That's right. And setting those habits and getting those things ingrained into your process it's imperative. And I've heard authors and different industry type people kind of look down their nose at Nanowrimo, and I think they kind of miss the point. That the point of Nano and some of these others things that we use to build habits, it's not to come out with a finished novel at the end of 30 days. It really is to get you to build good habits and to get through to the writer that this can actually be done.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that timed writing is so important, and proving to yourself that you can do it. I mean, I a big breakthrough, I remember it distinctly. I was at one of these writers' workshops. We all go to lots of them before we start writing novels, for example. And I remember the guy said, okay, I'm not going to give you a lecture. I'm setting a timer right now. In 5 minutes, you're going to write about somebody who disappointed you. Go. And that was it. And I was sitting there going, what? I came here for you to tell me stuff and for me to write notes. And then I was like, oh, well, I might as well write something. And, what I wrote in 5 minutes, even if it was just a few lines, it kind of proved to me that if you tell your brain to do something and set a timer, then you can actually write something. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot involved in writing a novel, but essentially it does come down to telling your brain to write something within a certain amount of time, and then not procrastinating, and also getting it out there. The thing is, it'll never be perfect, ever. You will always see things you want to change, but once you've been through professional editing, proofreading, etc., you just have to get it out there.
Right. So you finished the first novel at the end of this year. You set these goals, you worked it, you did all the right things. Then you have this finished novel, and so what do you do from there? Do you publish it on Amazon? We're in the midst of all this. Were you doing research about self-publishing and kind of that new market opening up? What was happening there?
Oh no, this was by the time we get to this point now, I started the Creative Pen in December 2008.
Okay.
And I didn't publish my first novel till 2011. So I wrote nonfiction. I built an author platform. I learned about marketing. I'd done a lot of nonfiction and a lot of self-publishing before I did a novel. So, and if people are interested, if you go to thecreativepen.com/first novel, I've put all the blog posts from first idea all the way to, leaving my job or selling 50,000 copies or something. So, over 200,000 copies. There you go. So, that's where I've put all of that. So basically, I never considered getting a publisher. I already was self-publishing, so I got a professional editor. And in fact, with that first book, the original title was Pentecost, but then I rebranded it as Stone of Fire because it's a less of a religious title and more of a conspiracy thriller title. And so I've used 5 different editors now on that book because, and this is the kind of the sad thing for fiction writers. It's like, sorry, but this is the truth. You will learn so much about writing in writing your first novel that you need a lot of editing, and every single edit you will learn something new. So I got a ton of different editors who went through different things, from like a high-level story edit to line edits to I paid for a sort of somebody who did story edits. I had proofreaders. I had lots and lots and lots of different people help me with the book. I had beta readers who looked at it, and so I did a lot of professional editing, professional cover design, all that type of thing before I decided to self-publish. And I've never considered a traditional deal for my fiction. I'm starting to do stuff for translation, but I never even considered any other option because I love the freedom, and there's much better money in it.
Yes, there is. I had I saw a post on Facebook last week from a writer, an author, a published author with a very well-known publishing house. I won't name names, but they kind of posted a rant on Facebook about how disappointed they were when their author earning statements came out. Their twice yearly author earning statements, and they had sold many books off the shelf, but still, through the creative accounting of the publishing house, had not broken even on their advance yet. And it was heartbreaking to see this author who was, fairly successful, but still not successful enough in that crazy accounting scheme of traditional publishing to actually make it. It was really disheartening.
Mm.
Yeah. Did you see much crossover from your nonfiction readers that came over to your fiction? I know you said you spent a good amount of time building this author platform and all of this. Was it difficult to get those readers switched over?
Well, I think in reality there is about a 5% crossover. So
Okay.
I think that's true for anybody. People listening to your podcast won't necessarily like your fiction.
Exactly.
That's just the way it goes. So
Right.
I think it's important for authors to think. I mean, that's why I have two different names, JF Penn and Joanna Penn, because I don't want I don't want my thriller readers to go and see a book on book marketing. I think it's crazy. And
Yeah.
what I blog about on jfpen.com, I talk about my research and I interview other thriller writers, and my newsletters include like I as JF Penn, I love going to graveyards. I'm a taphophile. There's a word for it. People who like wandering around graveyards taking pictures. There are lots of us, actually. It's one of
That's
these
great.
things. Yeah, there's a real yeah, I mean, I like architecture. I like Stephen King. I read John Connolly, who's I like the supernatural. So that part of me is kind of separate to the person who helps authors with self-publishing and marketing and stuff, because all types of authors are interested in self-publishing, but only certain types of readers enjoy fast-paced action-adventure thrillers, for example. So I don't think there's at the time, a few people bought the book out of curiosity, probably at that point. But I wouldn't suggest to anybody to build a non-fiction platform and expect to sell fiction. I do think they're quite different things.
So it very much was like starting over with
Oh,
building this
definitely.
audience.
Definitely, and it still is. It's much easier, I believe, to sell nonfiction than it is to sell fiction, because nonfiction, you have a title, like we said, how to market a book. People know whether or not they want that book,
Right.
But
Right.
a book like Stone of Fire, for example, how do you know you want that book? So you have to go on being out there and finding people through different ways. But I do think the two are quite different. But what's nice is that we all have that chance to write under different names. I think the freedom to write in multiple genres is super. And some days I feel like writing fiction, and some days I write nonfiction. So I certainly don't write fiction every day. It's one half of my life.
Well, one piece of advice that you hear from successful authors is don't switch genres, don't confuse your readers. And you writing nonfiction and then coming over to Stone of Fire. That's I understand that you created a new pen name that's your initials. But would you recommend people doing that, or do you
Yeah,
think that
definitely.
if you do that, should you use a pen name? Can you mix those audiences ever with good success?
I think it depends what you're writing. I mean, clearly, if you're writing children's books and erotica, you're going to use you're going to use two completely different names. I mean, I'm
Right.
using Joanna Penn and J.F. Penn. I mean, they and I'm completely open about these names. They're, if you do listen to my podcast, you'll hear about my fiction. But when you go on Amazon, they're two completely separate author brands, and I think that's the most important thing for people to remember. When you go onto the bookstores, the author name is like a key field. So if you click on an author name, you'll get the books that author has written. So as an author, if you're using two different names, even if you have one website, you're still going to be separated where the readers are. And I think that's important. Now, I've written, an action and adventure conspiracy thriller series. I've got a crime series, the London Psychic crime thrillers, and I've just written a dark fantasy novel. Now, they are on Amazon, they are different subgenres, but the feeling and the emotional promise, I think, of those subgenres are pretty similar. So, and I mean, someone like Stephen King, again, writes in a lot of different subgenres. I mean, he writes in sci-fi, horror, literary thriller, supernatural, occult, lots and lots of different subgenres. What he doesn't write is a romance, although now I'm thinking, has he written a romance? But, I'm not JF Penn, my JF Penn name, I won't write a romance under JF Penn, because romance readers want a happy ending. That's, and my endings are up. I would say they're up endings. My books are all good versus evil, and there's lots of bad stuff happens, but good will win, in the same way as Stephen King's book. So there's good versus evil, but when you're looking at a happy ending, which is what romance readers want, then I wouldn't write that under the same name. So I think that if you're writing different genres, the question is, are they really that different? So if you're we've had recently The Martian by Andy Weir. Andy Weir was already blogging about space and science. He's a scientist. There are chances are a lot of people who are scientists also read sci-fi books. So if you're blogging about science or geek stuff or gadgets, then you write a techno thriller or a sci-fi book, chances are people will be interested. But if you write something completely like a kid's book, that might be different. So I think it's just common sense, really. Who are your audience, and are you talking to the same group of people when you write this book, or at least slightly tangential?
Right. So now you have 7 books in this series, the Arcane series, and you said you've got one more coming up.
I've got lots more coming up.
When you conceived this idea and the characters there, did you see this as a long story arc, or did you see this one story and then at the end you're like, well, I think there's more for this character?
No, it was always modelling. I mean, modelling is very important. I model it after James Rollins has a series, the Sigma series, and also the kind of TV series that I like are more episodic. So a long-running series with a a supernatural agency, for example, is more each episode of the TV series, there's a problem and the world's going to be destroyed, and then we have to discover what the bad guy's doing, stop the bad guy, save the world, type of thing. So each of the Arcane books are Morgan Sierra and Jake Timber have to save the world, basically, but it's an episodic series, so each book is a standalone. But so you don't have to read them in order or anything, but there is, a story arc across the whole thing. But I always saw it as an episodic series that wouldn't have to end, like James Patterson as Alex Cross, James Bond, all of these types of long-running series that don't have an ending. So it can go on for as long as you want to write it, which I think is nice, versus my London Psychic crime thrillers, which are now a trilogy, actually have a kind of neat bow at the end of book 3. I can carry on, but they have a nice arc as such. So I think when you're writing, and Risen Gods, for example, is a standalone with not really any possibility of a sequel. So, you have to decide when you're writing what type of book you're writing, and what are your plans for that. And one thing when, as a businesswoman, what I looked at when I was considering fiction, for business reasons as well as creative reasons, is that authors with long-running series make more money. So, because if an author finds you at book 7, say people like the latest one in that series is One Day in New York. If lots of people bought that because it's set in New York, and then they went back and bought the other 6 books. So that's kind of the plan with a long-running series, is that people discover you later on and then go back and read the rest.
Yes. So you mentioned your decisions that you take when planning out some of these series, and one of the decisions one of the things that you have to take into account is that you are a businesswoman, and that this is your livelihood as well as your art. I think a lot of people don't handle that struggle between the business side and the art very well. What advice would you give to people who maybe are not sure that you can do both and be good at both and still not have this icky feeling that that your art is a business as well?
Well, I mean, you have to decide what you want. 99.99% of authors don't intend to make a good living at this. They don't say, I want to be on the Forbes richest author list alongside James Patterson and Stephen King,
Right.
which is my ambition in the next 20 years.
Sure.
And this is the thing. I think you have to decide what you want. And I was never willing. Well, I think when the penny drops around what a book actually means, it's just crazy. So just to explain to people, when you write a book, it's not one book. It's a copyright which you can license in all of these different ways. So you can create all these different types of ebooks selling on all these platforms. I've sold books in 68 countries. You can have print books, ebooks, audiobooks. You can translate those books. You can adapt them for TV, film, media. Each book you write, and also plus it can earn you money for the rest of your life and 70 years after you die. So what you're creating when you create a book is this amazing kind of magical thing that can earn you money after you're dead. I mean, that's just crazy. And once the penny dropped for me on what that actually means, I was just like, okay, I'm just going for this. Every book I write, adds more to my asset list, the assets that put income in my pocket. Now, completely separately, I love writing, and this is not a get rich quick scheme at all. Like, you have to really love writing. But if you want to leave your job, and I really did, and of course many people don't want to leave their jobs. A lot of people are happy in their jobs, so that's fine. If you're happy and you don't want to write for a living, then no worries. I wanted to leave my job and do this full time. And the only way you can do it full time is by having a good backlist. And the indie authors who are making 7 figures, 8 figures, have 30 books, 50 books. And some people might be reeling at that, going, what? How can you write 50 books? Well, Enid Blyton wrote 500 books. Aldous Huxley wrote 500 books. Nora Roberts, who writes so many books that her publisher, she writes under 2 names, Nora Roberts and J.D. Robb. So it's not just indie authors. I mean, being prolific, we Google prolific authors, you'll see how literary authors have also been prolific. So Stephen King, for every book he puts out, it said he puts one in a drawer.
Right.
And at the moment, I think he's got another one coming out. I just read his last one. So this is the thing. I think when people say, oh, I'm not very good at doing the business side, that's okay. You're probably not very good at writing a novel either. But what did you do? You went and learned. I mean,
right.
None of us are magically born this way. You have to learn this stuff. And nobody sort of worries about paying to go to a writing class, do they? I mean, people pay loads of money to go to classes on writing, but will they buy a book on business? I mean, this is what's so funny is that book I wrote, Business for Authors, How to Be an Author Entrepreneur. It doesn't sell very many copies. Now, the question there is, and I realized how many people actually want to be an author entrepreneur. Actually, most authors want a publisher to do the work for them. So this is the thing. I think, if you're listening and you think I'm kind of crazy, then maybe it's not for you. But if you're listening and you're like, yeah, I'm going to learn that too, then you can be successful. It really is the most amazing career. And the other thing is to remember that marketing and business is all creative. If you think of creativity as only writing a novel, then, that's just not good enough. Creativity is actually taking ideas and making them real in the world. And to make them real, you have to understand marketing, you have to understand cover design and all these different things in order that your book can actually make it into the world. So, yeah, I think it just comes down to what do you want out of your life and what is your definition of success?
And when you start breaking, people think that writing a lot to build that back catalog is daunting and inconceivable. But what changed my mindset was I sat down and did the math one day. If there are 365 days in a year, and I can write 1,000 words per day, that's 365,000 words in a year. That's three, 400-page novels, three 100,000, and several short stories, or a short novel, and that adds up really quickly. And for a lot of writers, 2,000 words a day is not a problem. That's over 700,000 words a year. It's just a matter of putting your backside in the chair and taking it seriously.
Yeah, and also remember, I mean, my books aren't 100,000 words. My full-length books are between 60 and 70,000 words. They're James Patterson length.
Right.
And I also have novellas, so they are around 25 to 30,000 words. Nonfiction generally skews shorter as well, between 40 and 60,000 words. And romance is around 50,000 words. So don't think that you have to write 100,000 words to have a novel. That's fantasy. Fantasy writers do need to do that, but
right.
I mean, not even that these days. But yeah, I mean, I think, and if people are daunted, then try writing a novella. Writing a novella is so much easier because to hold a whole novel in your head and try and work out all the plot issues and character issues and things with a 70,000 word book, for example, is very hard. But if you start with a novella, you might be surprised how quickly you can do it, and you can learn a lot of lessons by publishing a shorter book first, or at least writing a shorter book first.
Yeah. And there's definitely a market for serialized shorter fiction. That's the beautiful thing about the Kindle and other e-readers, is it's really opened up some of these strange little markets where people will absolutely pay 99 cents for a 10,000 word story that then carries on to another story and another story. There really are lots of possibilities if you just get a little creative and think about it.
My novellas aren't serials; they're standalone novellas. So I think you can do either, but I just write. Sure. I don't really like serials personally as a reader, but you're right that you can do any of this type of stuff. But I sell my novellas at $2.99 and my full length books at $4.99, and then you can then put them together into box sets, and there are loads and loads of ways to use once you have products, and we use the word product. Once you have products, you can put them together, you can work with other authors. That's how I got to the New York Times list and the USA Today list, is with doing a box set with other authors, and we did joint promotion. And once you get into this, there are so many options for what you can do, but it all starts with putting the words on the page.
Sure. Joanna, before we wrap up, you also encourage authors to look at their writing business in new and innovative ways, and you recommend public speaking and doing seminars, things like that. Would you like to speak to that end of how authors can use these other tools to build their brand and to increase their readership and to make money?
Yeah, so again, remember I talked to nonfiction authors and fiction authors. So pretty much the public speaking side is more aimed at nonfiction. Again, I've written a book on public speaking for authors, creatives, and other introverts because I'm an introvert, and many writers, particularly fiction writers, are introverts. And so yeah, public speaking is great if you are writing nonfiction, creating courses. For example, I have the Creative Freedom course, which is everything from writing, self-publishing, marketing, running a business. So you can create, if once you've written a book, you can turn that into a multimedia course, which people can buy over the internet, like a video course, that type of thing. Consider that multimedia aspect. You can do your own audiobooks. So I've recorded my own non-fiction audiobooks and done joint ventures with people for fiction. There are lots of ways to turn your book into multiple streams of income. But again, that differs really between fiction and non-fiction. For fiction, it's more about creating a backlist, creating a series, creating characters that people want to come back to. And so you have to kind of decide whether you want to focus one way or do both. I know some people like to do both, like me, and other people just focus either on fiction or non-fiction. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunities and plenty of ways to use your creativity if you want to make a side income or if you want to actually leave your job and do this full time.
Yeah. I think the big takeaway for me, Joanna, is that to not shackle what my expectations are, and to, if we're creative people, then don't be afraid to use that creativity.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, business is one of the most creative things you can do in general. I mean, that's how we create jobs. It's how we create opportunities. The most of the charitable giving that's going on today are being given by people who've created businesses. You can afford massive amounts of money. Look at what Bill Gates is doing, completely changing the African subcontinent using his creativity in business to fund massive change. So I think that's what's exciting really, is that business is truly creative, and whether you're writing a story or nonfiction or whatever you're doing, then enjoy the process and enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. Joanna Penn, your website is the Creative Penn, PENN.com, and also JFPenn.com.
Yes, absolutely. And I also have a podcast, the Creative Penn podcast, found in all the usual places.
Great. And your new book, Risen Gods, coming out December 1st. We're going to send everyone over to pick up a copy of it. And I'll put a link to all your stuff in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to join me.
Thanks so much for having me, Hank.